Just waving to you after you said hi, Laura.
Hi, Laura. Hi, everybody.
You too.
Hi, Laura Kurtz.
Okay, we're give me 1 second, and we're going to get started. And we're good, right over now. Okay, good evening, and welcome to another Scholar in Residence program at Temple Beth Kodesh. I have muted you all so that you don't interrupt with the sounds of your televisions, radios, food, phone calls, or anything else. Um, uh, this evening, we are very honored and fortunate to have with us Laura Blumenfeld. Um, First and foremost, Laura is the daughter of Norma Grill, Alaiha Shalom, a beloved and dear congregant who just passed away a few months ago. And she joined us at Minyan and we were talking. And if you read her bio, she is an acclaimed Middle East expert, and she's graciously agreed to share her insight and views with us tonight. Certainly, with everything that's been going on, everybody asks me, and I'm like, what do I know? I'm just a rabbi. I'm not a Middle East expert. So if we can have a real Middle East expert, what can be any better? Now, Laura, I didn't tell you this. Laura, I follow her on Facebook and all these different BBC interviews that she gives. I am not going to pretend to be a BBC interviewer. So this is what we're going to do. Laura, I'm going to give you the stage and you can talk about whatever you want to talk about. I'll feed you some potential topics, and then we'll take some questions through. Hopefully, that'll be easy enough for us to deal with. So, everybody understand the ground rules?
Unmute her, Rabbi.
I will. First, we'll spotlight her, and now we're going to. Oops, where'd she go? There we go. We're going to unmute you. Laura, you have to unmute yourself. Perfect. Okay. So let me get myself. All right. So again, Laura, I want to welcome you and thank you for sharing your expertise and your insights with us. So for those of you who want to know a little bit more about Laura's background, I will tell you that she is a best-selling author and a senior fellow at the Philip Merrill Center for Strategic Studies at Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies. She previously served as a senior policy advisor on the State Department's Israeli-Palestinian negotiating team, was a reporter, an award-winning reporter for the Washington Post, covering international foreign policy, presidential politics. She has written for a number of books and columns and articles, has been on multiple TV programs, and she's here with us. So without further ado, Laura, take it away. There's certainly every day it seems like there's another little wrinkle to this subject. So wherever you feel comfortable, go right ahead.
Great. Well, thank you, Rabbi Simon. It's really a privilege to join you all. I've had the great honor to be at your synagogue on Shabbatot with my mom and her husband, and it's just such a special community. And my father was a congregational rabbi. I grew up, and I can tell you, not every rabbi is as awesome as Rabbi Simon. So you're all lucky. I know you prize him. This, in a way, it's kind of nice. It's almost like a reunion with my mom's community. The book that I have, I don't usually stick my book in my background, but my mom, if any of you knew her, Norma Grill, she was a sort of sunny, happy person from Kansas. She brought that optimism into a nonfiction book. She's a character in this story. It's an exploration of revenge around the world. My father was shot by a Palestinian terrorist. He survived, but the book is an attempt to track the bullet back to the gunman and find the gunman and figure out what is the best revenge. It's a book that asks the question, how we all have these kind of fantasies of getting even. What is the best way to kind of even the score? So it's a personal story as a daughter, and it's also an intellectual journey as a Washington Post reporter. I travel around the world to Iran, where they have a lot of revenge, to Albania, where there's a revenge code, of course, to Sicily, where you have the mafia revenge. And again, just looking for the answer. But ultimately, the story has a happy ending. And as I said, it's a true story because of my mom's character, Norma, with that kind of Midwestern optimism. She helps me find a way to answer that question, what is the best revenge, without continuing any kind of cycle of violence. So if you knew Norma and and you miss her, she lives in the pages of this book. And so just going to stick that here. Again, I don't usually do that, but since some of you might be curious to read about her, that's my mom's story. So again, thank you, Rabbi. I'm going to just speak for maybe, I don't know, 5 minutes with a little broad kind of overview of some lessons that I've learned. As the rabbi said, I started off in Washington as a Washington Post reporter, so looking at things from the outside in, covering the White House, national politics, presidential campaigns, and of course the Middle East. Then I went into government. I worked under President Obama and Secretary Kerry on the Israeli-Palestinian negotiating team. I'm laughing because it was, I mean, otherwise I would cry. It was, very, very unsuccessful. That was in 2013 to 2015. And I was, rather than looking at it from the outside in, I was in the inside looking out. And since then, I've been at Johns Hopkins as a senior fellow, more as an analyst. And I'm on TV almost every day. You can just kind of Google me. There's a YouTube channel where I give Middle East analysis since it's been such a crazy busy time in that region. But what I thought I would start off by giving you is just kind of what I call like a Middle East cheat sheet that I would offer any president. I mean, I've interviewed every president, really starting from Jimmy Carter. You can see the little crow's feet around my eyes. So I've been around for a long time. Jimmy Carter, the Bush 1, Bush 2, Clinton. And so I've seen a lot of presidents taken a stab at Middle East peace. And so I would say that any president, right all the way up to President Trump, I would tell them that if you're going to have one piece of paper with kind of a cheat sheet on what to do in the Middle East, I would call it the 3 C's. There's 3 things that you need. One would be clarity. That's the first C. Number 2 would be context. And the third C would be commitment. So what do I mean by clarity? A lot of presidents, believe it or not, don't articulate a clear vision of what their foreign policy is. And you really need to do that if you're going to want people to understand what your goals are. And then you have to match your words with deeds. Because if you don't have any kind of consequences for whatever it is that you state that you want to achieve in the world, then you lose your leverage. And of course, leverage is everything that you have in international affairs when it comes to negotiations. And one example of that I saw where there was kind of a lack of clarity was when I was at the State Department under President Obama. Oh, but I should probably say, as a former Washington Post reporter, this is all off the record, if you're all okay with that. I'm just going to speak very freely with you. I hope that I see some people smiling. Just kind of, make this just kind of an off the record conversation. But anyway, under President Obama, we were working really hard in the State Department on getting the Israelis to kind of trust us, as we were saying, take a chance for peace, and we need to negotiate, and the 2-state solution. And at the same time, if you recall, President Assad of Syria at the time was sort of threatening his own population. And President Obama put a red line down, and he said, if it's found out that he's using gas on his own people, that is a red line, and the United States is going to intervene. And I'm sure a lot of you remember what ended up happening then was Assad did go ahead, and there was terrible evidence and footage that we saw on television of children and adults also, with burns and gasping and dying from this kind of chemical attack. And I remember the president kind of walking around the grounds of the White House, and ultimately he decided not to do anything, not to take military action against Syria. And at that point, I remember as a negotiator, traveling back and forth to the Middle East, really having lost the confidence of the people over there, where there just simply wasn't a connection between what the president said he's going to do and what he actually does. So I would say that would be, just one lesson of where you didn't have a clarity in terms of your foreign policy. Today, I think we're seeing really interesting change. Everybody's sort of heads are spinning with President Trump because he's taking such a different approach. Even last week, if you think about it, when President Trump said, if you don't release all the hostages, right, in Gaza, Hamas, if you don't release all the hostages by Saturday at noon, it was kind of this Gary Cooper moment of high noon. We were all in a Western movie. Then, quote, all hell is going to break loose, or we'll open the gates of hell. So it was very interesting for me to think about that, because he certainly had put out a clear message, but you can only do that kind of all hell message once. If there are no consequences, then you've lost your leverage. Netanyahu spent a lot of time last week kind of walking back that statement. So I would say that at this point, the president hasn't lost that kind of power of clarity. But anybody who's been a parent knows that you can only threaten, if you don't do that, there will be consequences. You can only do that once. And if you fail to follow through, then you've kind of lost a big part of your authority. So it'll be going forward. I think we're going to really have to think about that first C, clarity in President Trump. The jury's still out on that one. So that's the first C. Number two, context. Another lesson I learned, let's talk about a positive lesson, a positive example. I remember when I was at the Washington Post in the 90s working as a reporter, one thing that I was covering at the same time was I would go to Ireland and Northern Ireland and speak to the IRA and speak to Catholics and Protestants, who are working on the Good Friday Agreement. There had been strife there for decades in Northern Ireland. And then I was also sectarian strife in Ireland. And then I was also over in Israel quite a bit. I would parachute in from Washington, fly over there, working on just kind of stories about the Oslo Accords, where Israelis and Palestinians for the first time were speaking to each other, and there was this prospect of peace. But I remember being in Northern Ireland in Belfast and speaking to one of the leaders of the IRA and saying to them, like, why are you laying down your arms after all these years? You're willing to sort of go a sort of peaceful path and lay down your weapons. And he said to me, Laura, with this Irish accent, it's kind of trendy now. We're all making peace. You've got the Jews over in Israel and the South Africans and the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And he said, it's just the bigger context of what's happening in the world. So I thought that was a really interesting point. If you're the president of the United States and you have a proposal, a big peace proposal, whether it be for well, we can say Ukraine, right? Or we can say Gaza today. You really have to look in the context, the total global context, whether it's, military movement, economic trends, geopolitical trends. Does it really fit in with everything else that's happening? Because context is like almost like an email address. If you don't get it exactly right, if you're one letter off or one dot off, it'll bounce back at you. Even if your proposal is really good, it'll come right back at you. And again, I saw that and I learned that from our failure when I was at the White House. We were working on, Israeli-Palestinian peace in my office at the State Department. But President Obama had stood in front of the UN and made a big speech that fall. It was the UN General Assembly of 2013. So it was about 12 years ago. And he said the United States will have two foreign policy priorities. We're looking for Israeli-Palestinian peace. And the second one is an Iran nuclear deal. So we're going to be working on those two priorities. So what ended up happening, the context there, that second C, the context is I would go speak to, let's say, Jewish groups, or maybe I'd fly over to Israel and speak to Israeli counterparts. And they would say, we're not comfortable right now with this context. You're saying to us, take a chance for peace with Palestinians. America, you've got our back. But then you're negotiating with Iran on a deal that feels to us like it's existentially threatening. We do not feel like the context of America kind of leaning a little bit too far toward the Iranians on the one hand, and then telling us to trust the Palestinians. The context doesn't work. And so that's an example where the president really didn't quite get the context right. Okay, so that's number two. Number three, I would say, is commitment. And what I mean by that is the presidents who I've watched, it's one thing to say you're committed to Middle East peace, but the ones who've succeeded have been passionately, like heart and body and soul, committed to peace in the Middle East. Because you can fake it till you make it with a lot of things in life, but not with Middle East peace. They can really sniff out ambivalence. And again, under President Obama, I would speak to even Palestinians and I would say, oh, we have the two-state solution. We've got this great idea for you. And they would say, why should we take risks? Why should we make ourselves vulnerable when your president, Obama, doesn't even quite believe? I don't think he believes in peace. I think it's Secretary Kerry. And that was true. John Kerry was super kind of motivated. But it was really true that Obama was much more interested and invested in the Iran deal rather than Middle East peace. So you have to have a certain level of commitment. What I mean by that is like President Clinton. So when President Clinton was working on the peace treaties between him and Jordan, and then, of course, the Oslo Accords, he stood on the White House lawn and pushed Rabin, remember that, and Arafat together to shake hands. He was so very, very committed to Middle East peace. I remember I was at the White House when King Hussein came to celebrate with Yitzhak Rabin. This was the Jordan Peace Treaty, and this was in July of 1994. I was there as a reporter. I wasn't there as a negotiator, but I was in the room when they were celebrating. It was Al Gore, if you remember Vice President Al Gore from Tennessee. He had kosher wine and he was like, l'chaim, l'chaim. He was choking on the cha because he wasn't very, but he was trying with his Hebrew. And King Hussein of Jordan had sparkling water because he was a Muslim. He couldn't, drink alcohol. And it was all very chummy and kind of a beautiful night. And at the end of the evening, President Clinton got up and he said, "Let me walk you to the door to King Hussein." And King Hussein said, "I've been here so many times, I know my way out." And I really thought that was a beautiful example of a president who was so committed and kept meeting with the leaders, whatever it would take, until he got to that handshake. So I think that under President Biden, who was also very, very committed, you might say, well, why didn't we have peace then if he was so committed? And there's such a thing, though, I would say, is overcommitment. Because one thing that I learned from negotiating unsuccessfully under President Obama is when you have two parties who are negotiating, it's almost like couples therapy and you're the therapist. You can't want it more than they want it, right? You can't be more invested in the two parties coming together than the two parties are themselves. And I think that's what happened under President Biden, where he desperately, desperately wanted a ceasefire, but neither Israel nor Hamas were quite finished yet. In these kind of negotiations, it's always a pain gain trade-off. And for the Israelis, it was the pain was existential. It was unless they wiped out Hamas, it was kind of their own existential state was at threat. And of course, for Sinwar and for the leaders of Hamas, it also was literally the pain of death if they would negotiate the ceasefire. I mean, of course, Sinwar was killed anyway. But I would say that you have to be committed. On the other hand, when the parties on either side sense that you're overcommitted or care about it more than they do, you won't get there. So we're at the very beginning now with Trump. It's a totally different approach. It's sort of transactional. I kind of joke sometimes that under the first Trump administration, you had the Abraham Accords. If he makes peace under this administration, you might call it the Benjamin Accords because Benjamin is like the dollar bill, the $100 bill sign. It might be much more about financial and economic prosperity, but whatever it takes to get us to peace. I keep an open mind. I'm not really very partisan because I come from it originally as a journalist, which is, again, like I said, an outsider looking in. So that's it. I'm happy to take any questions. I started my career as an assistant to Tom Friedman, the New York Times Pulitzer Prize winning foreign correspondent. If you have any questions about that, about my time in the State Department, about my book, which is all about revenge. I don't know, good restaurants in Delray Beach, whatever you want to chat about. I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for sharing your insight with us. And I think we'll all remember the three C's as we go about reading the breaking news. All right, so let's take some questions, and I have some to follow up with. So if you wanted to go first, unmute yourself and wait for me to bring you on the screen. Gary?
Yes. I recall your mother, especially when she came to Temple with her Kansas City Chief jersey some years ago. And she was a fine woman. She reminded me that her name was Norma Jean.
That's right. Thank
Correct?
you.
So I do miss her, but she was a nice lady.
Thank you.
Hey, Gary. Earl?
Yes, and I also knew your mother, and she tried to teach us Hebrew, and she was very patient and very kind, and we really miss her and miss that continuation of that class, but she was sick and couldn't continue it. But I would like to ask you specifically about the two-state solution. I'm not sure. I understand, of course, that what the Palestinians seem to want is the entire state of Israel, not just the land they occupy now. But why is there such pushback? Is it because Hamas is so terrible? And I did go to the Nova exhibit here when it was in North Miami, and I can understand how angry you could become. And I know Elon Tron, who lost both a daughter and a son-in-law, and his son was protected, his grandson was protected by his daughter, and they shot right through her and wounded him, but he survived. I don't know if you know Elon Tron, but anyway, he's quite a man. But the what can you say about the two-state solution? Why don't we just say, go take Gaza and do what you want with it? Just leave us out of it and stop fighting us. What do you say?
You're muted, so first
Okay.
unmute you. So Laura,
Great.
Laura. Okay, perfect.
Okay, great. So thank you for the question. So just to clarify, the question is about why don't the Israelis want the two-state solution or the Palestinians?
No, the Palestinians want a one-state solution, their state, including Israel, but a
Right.
two-state solution, the world would accept a two-state solution.
Right.
Why isn't that pushed? Am I still muted on it?
No, you're good,
Right.
Laura.
So from the Israeli point of view, it's interesting. We used to go over to Israel and say, we're here from the State Department. We understand you have a problem, and we're here with a solution, the two-state solution. And again, this was 10 years ago, and they would say, what problem? We don't have a problem. We don't need a solution because life felt very good there. And then we would go to the Palestinians and say the same thing. We understand you have a problem. We're here with a solution. We have a two-state solution. And they would say, what two states? Yeah, we want one state. So you're right about from the Palestinian point of view. I think that, I like to think of Isaac Herzog, who's the president of Israel. I really admire him. He tends to be a moderate and also just very common sense. And I remember he said a year ago, no Israeli in his right mind right now would consider a two-state solution. And I feel like that's an interesting bellwether because he's not an ideologue, annexationist, or he's very, very moderate. And I think it's really a lot about the psychological trauma and just the very narrowness of the country itself. It's only 9 miles wide, in its narrow spot. And I think that there's a sense that if there were two states that that the Palestinians would use the West Bank as a launching pad, and should be firing right into, from their clotheslines, just right across the border into, you're hanging out your laundry and you would be attacked. I mean, just in your daily life. So I think it's more of a pragmatic thing. It's really sad. When I was at the State Department, there was a majority opinion support for a two-state solution. And so, again, Isaac Herzog most recently said that he thinks it's a generational trauma, that it could take a generation for Israelis to get over what happened in Gaza. The good news, I'll try to leave you with some good news, is that unlike in the United States, public opinion is much more elastic. This is what pollsters say, meaning that the numbers bump up and down much more quickly. And I think it's because they live kind of on the edge. Their nerves are more tightly wound. So one minute they say, we would never support this, and it changes much more quickly than opinions in the United States, where they're much more firmly. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if that.
Yes, it does. And I also see your book when I watch Morning Joe, and I always see books in back there when they interview somebody. And I'm happy to buy your book because I loved your mother very much, and I am.
Thank you. Yeah, I never do that because I figure like if I'm on TV talking about the Middle East, like, I don't know, revenge, my dad was shot in the head, it might get a little complicated. But yeah, for you guys.
Well, thank you, Earl. Anybody else have a question?
I'm happy to
Okay.
talk about revenge. I ran around Iran and some kind of crazy places if you want to hear about that. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I have a couple of questions.
Okay, good.
Following up. The Trump plan and everything we're reading about, and what you said, the transactional aspect of it. Where do you think it might all lead? And is there a realistic end game, or is this just an opening salvo and negotiating ploy to just get things moving?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting and important question. One thing I learned from my former colleagues who are still journalists is a mistake they made during the first Trump administration was you need to take him seriously, but not literally. So the proposals, the things that he says, they may not literally come true, but you should take them seriously because there's always a kernel in there, something that's important and interesting. And I think a lot of us can agree, whether we support Trump or not, that the the solutions of the past haven't solved the problem. If anything, it's just only gotten worse. So he's been good at identifying a problem. And already you see that the Arab world is very motivated. I mean, there's nothing like a gun to your head, right, to get you some kind of clear thinking. They're very motivated in coming up with counter proposals. There are 4 different Arab plans now that are circulating. There's going to be a meeting in Saudi Arabia on Friday this week, with not only Saudi Arabia, first it was just going to be Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan. Egypt and Jordan, because those are the 2 countries where Trump wanted to displace the Palestinians to. But then the rest of the Gulf countries, the G6 countries, said, well, what about us? They wanted to be a part of it too. So now they're going to join in the meeting, which is good, right? Because they're the ones who have the money and could finance potential, reconstruction. So there are 4 plans being circulated. Egypt supposedly has the most popular plan. They have some kind of core principles. Number one, that Hamas cannot be in control, not of the military, not of the government either. Palestinians should not be displaced. That there'll be financing coming from the Gulf countries and also from Arab countries and also perhaps from other international bodies. And that, that there'll be no, that there will be Palestinians governing the area, but they won't be aligned with Hamas or even the Palestinian Authority. So they have their principles. It's funny though, they're kind of worried, like you said, well, what about Trump's plan? So they're thinking about renaming it because sometimes it's just about branding, right? There's Trump Tower and there's Trump Golf Course. So they're going to call it the Trump Plan and the Trump financing program as a way to appeal to the US president because he still is kind of the big dog in charge, the big man. But so that would be the best case scenario. That's what we can all hope for.
Lou?
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for this informative talk. It's been wonderful, and I truly appreciate it.
Thank
Going
you.
back to your days as a reporter, what is your feeling of the process of reporting the news today? Is it even-handed? Is it biased? Either way, it appears that it's been starting to change now. That reporters are starting to change differently. Have you felt that change?
I really have, and it's a really important question. I find it almost unrecognizable. I started off in the early 90s and there was a real reverence for just facts and language even, and learning. There was a curiosity. I wrote about Republicans and Democrats with equal empathy, right? The big exciting challenge of being a journalist is you could put yourself in somebody else's shoes and look at the world through their eyes. And it was about universal, I'm sorry, I sound so corny, but this is really true. It was about a universal human experience and trying to connect your readers to whatever it was, that you were writing about, and just kind of illuminating issues and hard policy questions, but by maybe giving anecdotes and examples of how that plays out in the real world. We would never, for example, give the people who we were interviewing the questions in advance or any. Now today, it's just even look, my own newspaper, the Washington Post, when they got that slogan, they put that slogan on their newspaper, "Democracy dies in darkness." Um, under was it Bezos? No, was it Bezos? I guess, yeah, because in the first administration he was pushing up against Trump. It just suddenly felt like, I guess what newspapers are like in other countries, though, like in England or in Israel, where they're clearly political and have a political agenda. We really had no agenda other than, kind of bringing stories into the world, and that was really exciting. So I would not want to be a journalist. Look at you. I wouldn't want to be in a newsroom today. It doesn't seem fun, and it doesn't seem like the mission has changed. I'm
Thank you so
sorry.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lou. Uh, Joe.
Yes, Joe.
Oh, there's Joe.
Hi. Well, thank you for the presentation. Very informative. Uh, in my opinion, I think the biggest problem in the Middle East is Iran. And in your opinion, what could be done to bring them in line or make them behave or get rid of them altogether? What's the most optimal solution there to get Iran out of the picture?
Yeah, Iran is like the most interesting question, I think. So I agree with you that they're behind everything. Um, I'm trying to think about what I can tell you, a funny story I can tell you about when I was in Iran. I mean, they're a culture. I went, studying revenge, and so I went to the Shiite Center of Learning. It's Qom, is the holy city of Qom, and I met with the Grand Ayatollah. So he kind of looked like my grandfather, an Orthodox rabbi, but he had a black turban on, but he had a black coat and a beard, and was sitting with behind all his books. They were in Arabic. Um, but and he talked a lot about Sharia, which is lahavdil, kind of like halacha, about Jewish, learning. And he talked, these kind of minutia about prescriptions, about how, again, we talked a lot about revenge, and how when somebody is hurt, they have to be hurt exactly the same amount, because otherwise you have to do it again and again. And he talked about the idea of one grave opposite one grave, this kind of balance. Um, so I mean, I would say that the Israelis, of all the countries, Middle Eastern countries in the world, the one that they respect most, and maybe that's why they fear it, is the culture of Iran. And I think Netanyahu feels like now is the opportunity for that showdown blow. They could take out Iran's nuclear facilities, and senators like Lindsey Graham, I saw him actually in Florida just 2 weeks ago. He was speaking at an event, and he said, they are it's incapable, they're incapable of striking a deal or a fair deal, because they just lie about everything. And in my experience, I have to say the culture, I love rugs and shopping, and I've been to the Grand Bazaar in Iran, and it really, they have no problem, just even more than the Israeli, the sheikhs in Israel. I know there's a lot of haggling there too, but um, there is a kind of different culture when it comes to the truth. So Lindsey Graham was saying the only way to deal with them is with a military strike. I think that's a point of friction, not only between Lindsey Graham, of course, who's a Republican, and Trump, but between Israel and the U.S. administration, because Trump clearly wants to try to deal with them through negotiations and strike a diplomatic deal, and I think Netanyahu would like to take that military blow. So it's almost as if Trump is using Israel as his enforcement arm. Like if this were the mafia, like Bibi is his enforcer. And so he's going to try to negotiate a deal. What Lindsey Graham said today is the last thing I'll say. It's almost like a deadline diplomacy. He said, put it on a clock, give them 60 days to negotiate. Otherwise, they'll string it out forever and take advantage of the United States. I don't think that Iran respects America. They think that they're naive, that they kind of hoodwinked Obama into that first deal, and that they can just do it again this time. So I think you need Israel's kind of hard bitten approach, which is, there's bite to their bark, and with Trump, they might be just thinking that they can. Trump likes the bark, but doesn't really want to bite.
Well, I hope he bites.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Uh, Connie?
I think oh no.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay. Do you really think that a solution that's long lasting can be reached? You have two people who honestly believe that they have a right to the land. There's only one land. You have one group who has hundreds of years of history. You have another group who has thousands of years of history.
Who's that?
I don't see the Palestinians accepting a solution that will move them someplace else. That's just an opinion.
Well, I agree with you that it's very hard to see a way forward now. I completely agree with you. The message of the book that Rabbi Simon has behind him, Revenge, is, when you can look someone in the eye, it's hard to shoot them in the head, right? As I said, a Palestinian gunman had shot my dad in the head, and it was almost, I went undercover basically and found the gunman. I found this family, and I'll just, it has a happy ending. I won't tell you how he got there, but it was the idea, and it's a very American idea, right? Of love overcoming hate. And if you can see someone as a human being, then, there's all these kind of it's been optioned as a movie. You can understand why, because it's a very American story, right, about humanizing the other. Here's the problem, though, and you kind of raise it, which is on October 7th, the Hamas gunmen and terrorists they looked their victims in the eye and shot them in the head, right? So they had no problem doing that. And it's very, very hard. Where do you go from there? Where's the trust? And so I guess I would agree that it's going to take time and it's going to start with education. And the problem with education, I remember going into Gaza. I've been in Gaza many, many times as a reporter for the Washington Post, and I interviewed the founders and the leaders of Hamas. Sheikh Yassin was the spiritual founder of Hamas. I went into his house and a little boy opened the door, a cute little boy, and greeted me. It was his grandson. And he took me by the hand to his preschool. And you know how, like in preschools, they have little, like, if they have your name with your picture, and it's like a little, it could be the kitten room or the puppies, and they have a little, so they had a tree with all the cute little kids in the Hamas preschool, and it was a martyr tree, and it was like future martyrs growing. So the problem is that it starts at that age, and it's not sexy. When I worked at the State Department, people didn't really want to work on education. They didn't want to work on de-radicalization. It was more interesting to talk about borders and security, refugee issues, Jerusalem, and the kind of soft issues like education always get kind of pushed aside or they don't get funded. And the other thing that's hard about it is it takes a generation. Like, I don't know if you've heard of Mort Zuckerman. He's a kind of a big real estate publisher. He's one of these very wealthy Jewish philanthropists who was very supportive of the peace process. And I remember he came into our office and he said, I think we need 20 years before we can sign the agreement now, but we need 20 years before we can actually turn it over to the Palestinians to control the border. And my boss said, why 20 years? And he said, because that's how long it takes to educate a young person, and their education system needs to be completely, revamped. So I want to say it's possible, but you've got to change the culture, and that won't come quickly. I hope that helps. But the last thing I want to say, because I'm being so sort of blunt with you here, um, I do think that the trauma here, the emotional trauma, it in addition to everything else, is it's just the intangibles. Like I said, we were negotiating borders and security issues, Jerusalem, refugees. Those are all things you can touch and see. But I think the intangibles, like the emotional piece, is going to be much harder this time around. And it's why sometimes when I was working on this issue as a negotiator, it felt almost a little claustrophobic because, like you said, it's so simple. It's two people, one land, right? It's mine, no mine, let's share, no fair. Repeat, right? It's mine, no mine, let's share, no fair. And again and again and again. And then like where do you go with that? So yeah, you might want to be a China expert. It gets to be a little more interesting. I don't know.
Thank you.
You. That reminded me about something. Last week, Abbas said they're going to get rid of the pay for
Pay for slay. Yeah.
slay. And I've seen something said, well, they're just rebranding it, going back to that other thing you said. Is it real or are they just rebranding it?
Yeah, excellent question. So if does everybody know about that? I don't know, raise your hand. Is that something that people are familiar with? They were giving subsidies, basically rewards to the families of Palestinian prisoners, many of whom were violent offenders. So you were kind of incentivized to commit violent crimes. And so that was a big issue, especially for the United States, to give assistance to the Palestinians. And they cut off their funding because of that pay for slay. But Abbas, is trying to appeal to President Trump. It was actually negotiated under President Biden. I know the guy who worked on it for 4 years under President Biden, and then he didn't get any credit for it because Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, wanted to wait for Trump. So Netanyahu and the Israeli government dismissed it, as you said, as just kind of a sleight of hand. Like, we're going to take the money from the prisoners fund and put it into the welfare fund, but it's going to go to those same families anyway. I think it's one of those we'll have to wait and see. Uh, it's understandable why the Israelis would be skeptical.
Rhonda had a question, if I can find her.
Hi, Laura. I just want to echo also how much we cherished your mom.
Thank you.
But I have a question. Can you tell me, are the Israelis hopeful or not at all? I don't know. I don't get a sense of what they're thinking and feeling.
Thank you for that. I think that for as long as there are hostages, the whole country is held hostage. It just, they have not moved on from October 7th, because they felt like they're being, being held in captivity. There's so much national identification for those who are being held against their will. Israel, it's kind of secret to its strength is that it's all one big family, right? So everybody supports the IDF, and every son who's fighting is, is my son, is your son, is my daughter. But the bad side, the flip side of that is, when one person is held in bondage, and here it's, it's many dozens still, it's hard to think beyond that. That's why Biden, again, God bless him, he tried really hard to get to that ceasefire, because he kept thinking once you get the hostages out, you kind of unlock that anxiety and ability or lack of ability to look forward. So the idea that I know that we've heard a lot about, you can't defeat Hamas militarily. That's one goal, right, that Israel had, and you can't free the hostages or negotiate a ceasefire for the hostages. That's another goal, that their intention. But the truth is that Israel is in a permanent state of war with Hamas, so there can't really be a permanent peace. I always felt like that was a false kind of a false idea that, well, if there's a ceasefire, then what are they going to do? They can't go back and fight with Hamas. Of course they can, because they will, because there always is another war between Israel and Hamas. So, okay, long answer, but short answer is I think that Israelis are inherently optimistic people, and they've turned a corner because they're feeling their military momentum is with them, and they've reasserted that kind of deterrence, which was so important for them in the region militarily, but kind of psychically as a nation. I think when the hostages come home, they can really start healing.
Can I say something?
If I find you, go ahead.
Why did Biden think that if they bring back the hostages, Israel will be open to talk to the Hamas or to Arabs after they burned and killed and did such terrible things? I don't think that mindset is right at all. And like you said, I don't think even if they give the hostages back, that's going to bring to a peace solution. Absolutely not. It's too raw.
Yeah, I think that that's a very true and important point, that sometimes the US government can be emotionally tone deaf, where they kind of are so in love with their own ideas that they speak rather than listen. And when I think about lessons learned from our failures when I was in the government, one of them was that we didn't listen enough. We didn't listen, or we didn't hear. We might have these kind of listening sessions, but we really didn't internalize what people are saying. That was true of what we were hearing from Palestinians, because it didn't fit with our pretty little picture, and Israelis as well. So I think you're right.
Anybody else have a question?
I do.
Who's up? Who?
Who,
Oh,
me?
Okay. There you go.
Here I am. Hi. Just curious how you got around to all of these countries like Iran or going into Gaza. I know 40 years ago I worked for a big auditing firm, and if they wanted someone in the Middle East, you were not allowed to be Jewish, period. How did you get around? Just curious.
Yeah, that's again, great question. So when I was going to meet with, let's say, the family of the terrorist family of the man who shot my father in the book in Revenge, I introduced myself simply as Laura. I'm a reporter for I don't think I said Washington Post, because I was actually on leave from the newspaper. It was for my book. I just said I'm Laura. I'm a journalist, and I didn't use my last name, and which was kind of crazy, because at one point I remember I was sitting in the living room of it wasn't the gunman, but it was the ringleader of the gang that had been shooting terrorists. They shot a Christian British tourist. They shot a German woman on the Via della Rosa in the Old City. And because they were so proud of their terrorist son, they had a newspaper clip of their son, with his like keffiyeh and his terrorist, and it had the names of the victims, including Rabbi David Blumenfeld, my father, who my father was alive, but and I was like, oh look, we're on their coffee table. So that was really horrible. Like I was sweating and nervous, and so stressed. In fact, my knee is jiggling just remembering it. And so in certain cases, I just presented myself as Laura, and they just assumed I wasn't Jewish. And so like on Christmas, they gave me Christmas cookies and, they wished me Merry Christmas. And I even would joke to myself, like, okay, don't go in profile. They'll see my nose, I could just fix them head on, Um, in Iran, I'm trying to remember, what did I do?
Like, how did you even get the passport? Said
Right.
Blumen.
Right. Good point. Okay. So it was my first year of marriage, and although I did keep my name, I got a second passport with my husband's name, Weiss. And that's how I was able to, like, if you see the book or whatever, actually, you can go online, Rabbi Simon, I'll give you a link. Diane Sawyer on Primetime Live did a 20-minute video which summarizes, and it's a lot of fun. So you don't have to buy the book. I'll give it to you and we can share it with the group. If I don't know if you want to do it while we're in the chat here, or if afterward. What's easiest for you?
Send it to me now and I'll put it
Okay, I'll
up.
send it to you now. So yeah, so I had but when I'm trying to remember when I went to Iran, um, I went to Jordan first, in order to sort of, I think, yeah, to kind of wipe the Israel part out of my passport. And my husband we were living in Jerusalem at the time. We knew we couldn't call each other, right? Because you didn't want to have phone contact between Israel and you. I think you couldn't. So he wrote me 14 notes on 14 pieces of paper. So for the whole 2 weeks that I was there, it was our first year of marriage, So we could like, oh, dear sweetheart, because I couldn't have any communication with him the whole time I was there. And in Gaza, again, they just project, you're like a whiteboard and everyone just projects onto you whatever they, whatever identity they want. When I was here, I'm gonna just look for this revenge video so you guys can watch it when we get off. Here it is, Diane Sawyer. Okay.
I'm from
So,
Jerusalem.
I didn't reveal my identity till the very end of the book, and that can be a big surprise. Okay. And the thing about okay, I just sent it to you, Rabbi Simon, to your WhatsApp, and then maybe you can share the group. So that's a fun link. You'll see the whole story of the book behind me. Yeah. So it was very scary. And with the Hamas leaders, again, I was almost like a magic cloak. Being a journalist is like I could just be under a magic cloak. I was wrapped inside of a story. So it wasn't, I wasn't thinking I'm a Jew, I'm the daughter of the victim. I'm just Laura, the journalist, and that kind of, I wouldn't allow myself to think about, who I really was. And it was strange. And then maybe a month after I would interview them, Israel, like they would shoot them and like a lot of my best sources were assassinated because so many of them were getting eliminated, which was very weird. So
Could see that.
yeah.
Thank you.
You got the link, right,
I
Rabbi?
got the link on it.
Okay, great.
Somehow send that. Now, if I could just find 053 because okay, there you go. Okay, unmute yourself, please, Nooch.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You're muted. There you go.
Okay.
You're good.
Good.
You're good.
Laura, hi there. I heard you saying that you work with Thomas Friedman,
Yeah.
and I'm very confused about him. Does he or does he not love Israel? And do you feel comfortable talking about it?
That's such a good question. Sorry, I keep saying that, but you guys are all asking me great questions. So I was in college reading his, pieces, and I thought, wow, who is this guy? He must be like a tall, blonde wasp. Because I don't know, Thomas, that sounded so kind of waspy. And then I went off and lived in like I did a kind of Peace Corps thing. I lived in a Palestinian village, and the first Intifada broke out, and all of a sudden, my Peace Corps program, blew up with the first Intifada. So I saw a sign in front of a house in Jerusalem that said New York Times. And so I left a note on the doorstep because I realized, wow, that's Tom Friedman, and put with my phone number on it. That's how I met him. I just left a note on his front step. And he ended up calling me, and I met him. And of course, instead of being a tall blonde wasp, he was like a short Jewish guy from Minnesota. And he was very, very idealistic and committed to Israel. He had grown up in like a Jewish youth group, but he had been in Lebanon in 1982 when Israel was bombing Lebanon. And I think, like all of us, when we're young, we fall in love with a version of Israel. And then some people become very embittered, and some people just kind of integrate it. And you can go in different directions. You can become even more pro-Israel, or so I think that for him, the experience of seeing, sort of being on the ground and seeing what happens firsthand, with it really kind of affected him. But Tom is a good friend, and he still is a friend, so it's hard for me to say what his beliefs are. But I would say that you're not alone. There are a lot of people who are troubled by what he writes, and I think he has a new piece out actually just today, so we'll have to check it out. I mean, here's the thing: you may not agree with his criticism, and I don't always agree with him, but I would say it comes from a place of caring. He's certainly not enamored of Netanyahu, that's for sure, right? He really doesn't like Netanyahu. Um, but I think he does care about Israel, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And
Thank you, Manoj.
if you don't agree with what he says, you're not alone.
Thank you.
Lou, are
Right.
you, Lou?
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Thank you. If I can
you're good.
unmute, where?
Oh, you're good. You're good. I hear you.
Okay. Laura, another question. Just before we went on, I saw a news blurb that Hamas is willing to release all of the prisoners for the end of the war. Is this just another public relations throwout? They seem to have a better handle on public relations than the Israelis do.
Yeah, and the Israelis will tell you that. It's really, I was at just the Israeli embassy. I was just at the Israeli embassy recently, and they were talking about how they have such great military might, but their public relations is really weak. So they themselves will acknowledge that. The ambassador, outgoing ambassador Mike Herzog, who's the brother of Isaac Herzog, the president, was saying that. I think if you think about it, like with that last hostage, once Hamas releases the last hostage, what cards do they have, right? They have nothing left. So they're desperate for that kind of end of war declaration, and they understand that that's all that they have. So I understand why they would offer that. What I don't understand is why wouldn't Israel just agree to that? Because I don't see Trump is not Biden. If Israel needs to go back in, as Trump has said many times, you do what you got to do. So if I were Israel, I would take that deal. And if you have to go back in and do what you got to do, I'm not sure that this administration would stop the IDF.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Going once.
Yeah, Rabbi.
Earl.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Earl.
Okay. What about the obvious failures by the IDF at the beginning of that day? Could you say something about, is there any information about what they didn't do? It seems it was just a terrible problem that they didn't answer to.
October 7th, you're saying?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So just last night, I saw the Ramat Kal, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs for Israel, Herzi Halevi. He's resigning in the early March, but he was in Washington, and I had the opportunity to speak to him last night, and he was saying that the number one thing that he feels is responsibility for what happened. And I asked him, what are you going to do when you step down in March? He said, I'm going to be busy. And I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm going to go to all the bereaved families and offer my condolences and my apologies. It's interesting how the IDF really has taken seriously the idea of an internal investigation in a way that the politicians haven't. And he talked a lot about how the importance of rebuilding trust between the army and society, right? Because that's their very core mission is to put themselves between there are terrorists, There are Israeli civilians, and the IDF is supposed to be between them. The last thing he said that was interesting was that when he first got the reports, of an attack, he got into his car and he was driving to military headquarters, and he was coming down the mountain and to the point where you would go straight, you would come down from Jerusalem, you come down the hills and you go straight to get to Tel Aviv, but he wanted to turn left. He wanted to go to Gaza. He wanted to go put himself there and to be on the ground. And instead, he had to go to headquarters because at that point they thought that Hezbollah from Lebanon was going to join the war. It was so uncertain in those early hours. They thought it was going to be a multi-front war right away, like Hamas wanted it to be, right? They called for an Al-Aqsa flood, that everybody should come flooding in. He apologized to those four women soldiers who were released recently. Their job was to sit as sort of, they call them tatspiot, which are
At the border.
yes,
Okay.
on the border, right, to be lookouts almost, and how he apologized to them, which is kind of a big thing. He's like this big general guy to say, we didn't take you seriously, we didn't listen to you, and we failed. So I think that it's going to be years until they understand exactly what went wrong. There were dots, but they didn't connect the dots. And it was a failure of imagination, if nothing else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's take one more question if anybody has a question. Otherwise, I'm going to ask the last question. Okay. Okay, Anne? Yeah, okay, Anne.
What's your
What?
feeling? What's your feeling once the hostages are all released? What do you think will happen with the Israeli government?
Well, I
Wait,
can't.
time out before you answer that.
Yeah.
Anne,
Yes.
that was my question.
No.
I can't tell you whether the coalition will stand or fall, or if that is that what you mean? What will happen
Yes.
politically? Yeah. I mean, there are different pressure points. They talk about that the budget, is coming up for review in March. That could be when the budget, when the government, the coalition breaks. The Haredim serving in the military, that's another pressure point because they really do need more soldiers. This is something that actually Herzi Halevi, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs was mentioning last night. They just need more people power. So that could be something that could bring down the government. But whatever else happens in Israel, I think once the hostages are released, Israel is going to move forward, and that kind of positive energy. Somebody asked earlier, what's the mood in Israel? I do think it's going to lift, and people are going to be very excited to move forward. Israel is very forward looking. I mean, there's a respect for the past that's all built, of course, on ties, historic ties. But I think that they're going to kind of get some of their mojo back, which is why I'm optimistic. And if they can work with President Trump, it's such a tricky time in the world right now. It's so uncertain. But if they can kind of work with President Trump on that kind of, economic development and forward momentum, I think Israel is going to be just fine.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah.
Well, I hate to break this to you, but we do have one more question.
Okay.
Joan?
Yes. Well, I've lived a long time and I danced in the streets after World War II, but there was always revenge. There'll always be revenge. When they start building up Gaza again, you think those people will not want revenge again? And someone will come up and get a Hamas lead. You cannot, they have ideals, and you can't destroy their ideals. I don't see how there'll ever be peace. There'll always be revenge between the Gazians and the Israelis.
Well, I don't disagree with you that they will want revenge, but I would say that our culture, our Jewish culture, is about a kind of constructive revenge and positive revenge where we take that kind of anger, we don't deny it, right? We don't turn the other cheek, right? Jews do not believe in turning the other cheek, but we believe instead of blowing ourselves up, we build ourselves up. I mean, that's what we're doing here tonight. That's what Beit Knesset, your congregation is all about. It's learning and positivity. And think about the Holocaust survivors. You danced after World War II. Think about how successful those survivors were, the businesses they built, or the books they wrote, and the families that they
True.
had. And so I can't control what our enemies will do, but I do think that American Jews here and hopefully Israeli Jews, as long as they stay true to that tradition, I think that's the best revenge. And that's what Judaism and America in the past has been, right? The best success is the best revenge. That's what America is, a country of immigrants, of second chances, and striving for for their comeuppance. But you change the power equation again by, you're kind of knocked into the dirt, right? And instead of eating that dirt and thinking about bringing that other person down, you just build yourself up. Revenge of the nerds, I guess I would say. So I think that
I
as long
don't agree. I think that there's always revenge between, look what's going on between Russia and us now. Russia was our best friend at one time, going back a long time.
right,
Now, they're our arch enemy.
but they might be our
Have
friend
a
again.
feeling, I think
We're working on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Russians
Yeah.
have a feeling of revenge towards the West for what they went through.
Right. So we can't really, I mean, it is a
Revenge is a thing of, I think it's a natural fear of people feel revenge. You can't kill it in people.
I agree. I don't think turn the other cheek is necessarily realistic, at least not in the Middle East. It's just what do you do with that feeling? And I would just say take it and build a thriving society instead of building tunnels, right? Take your cement and look at UAE, build, Burj Khalifa, build a tall tower and make peace treaties and that's what they've done with their cement. And in
I
Gaza,
hope so, but I don't, I'm sure I'm not going to live to see it.
Oh, you never know.
Well, maybe.
I have faith in you, Joan.
I'm glad
Thank you,
do.
Joan. Thank you. Okay, Laura, we can't thank you enough for
Thank
spending
you.
this time with us this evening and your insights and answering our questions. Everybody, thank you so much. When are you coming back in town?
I hope, inshallah, right? Cross my fingers, in about a week. And it's
Oh,
funny.
okay.
I remember being with you all, speaking of revenge, being with my mom and my kids for Purim. That's like our favorite revenge holiday, right? You guys have a great Megillah reading, so maybe I'll be able to join you this year if I'm around.
We'd love to have you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again, and we
All
really
right.
appreciate you being with us. And I will speak to it. I sent out the link with the Diane Sawyer interview in chat, and I'm going to ask Liz to send it out in the Shabbos blast. She'll put a little blurb about it too, so those who aren't here can at least see that.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Get the book. Yeah.
I'm pregnant in it, so if I look a little, you'll.
Got it. Okay. Again, thank you everybody for being
All
here.
right.
Hope you have a good evening, and we'll see you tomorrow morning at Minion at 8:30.
All right. Thank you,
Okay,
guys.
thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's just fabulous.
Too bad you
Thank
can't
you.
hear our
Thank
claps.
you, Laura. It was wonderful listening to you.
Thank you. It's great to
If
see
you
you. I'll
come,
see you.
if you come for Purim, wear a costume.
Okay.
But not Kansas City.
Not in our